Hi girls and boys, welcome to Storytime. This week's story, as I promised you, is a Bible story and it's from the Illustrated Treasury of Bible Stories, a great big book with lots of great Bible stories in it, and the publisher is called Miles Kelly and they have very kindly given us permission to read one of the stories today to you, and this week is called David and the Giant. I hope you enjoy it. The people of Israel saw that other nations had kings to rule them and demanded that they should have one too. The great prophet Samuel asked God for approval. He was told to choose a man called Saul from the tribe of Benjamin to be the first king of Israel. King Saul won many victories against Israel's enemies, but he did not always do as God wanted. For this reason, God told Samuel that Saul's sons would never be king. God ordered that Samuel travel to Bethlehem and find a shepherd boy called David, the youngest son of a man called Jesse. It was David that God wanted to be the next king. Samuel did so and gave David a special blessing, and from then on, God was always with him. King Saul's army often had to fight the Philistines because they were constantly invading Israelite territory. Every Israelite who could be spared was called to defend their lands, and 3 of Jesse's other sons were on the front line. One day, Jesse sent his son David off with food supplies for his brothers. He reached the camp as a battle was beginning, and the armoured soldiers were marching onto the battlefield. Suddenly, they all turned and came running back in fear. "Whatever is going on?" David called, as one terrified soldier ran past. The man shouted, "Look!" and pointed behind him. Striding in front of the Philistine army was a warrior more enormous than David could have dreamt. He was almost twice as big as everyone else. Can you imagine it, boys and girls? Twice as big. "Run away if you like," the giant bellowed. "There's no need to do battle if you're too cowardly. Just send someone to fight me in single combat. Whoever wins has victory for their side. Now, is any of you men big enough to take up the challenge?" He smashed his mighty spear against his shield and threw back his head and roared, and the noise crashed around the surrounding hills like thunder. David was outraged. "How dare he? It's an insult not just to us, but to God," he said. "Just let me at him. Out in the pastures, I've killed lions and bears when they've attacked my father's flocks, and I can do the same to this beast too. God protected me then, as he will protect me now." "Well," said Saul, casting around for other volunteers, but none were forthcoming. "Very well, and God be with you." Saul insisted on dressing David in his own armour, but it was so big and bulky that he couldn't move, so David took it off again. David strode out to meet the giant Goliath with just his staff, his slingshot, and 5 smooth stones in his shepherd's pouch. King Saul and his army watched in amazement. The giant was roaring with laughter as a mere child walked towards him. The young boy was yelling back that he was going to slay Goliath in the name of God. The shepherd boy stood firm as the giant ran towards him, brandishing his spear. Then David raised his slingshot and he whirled it around once. A stone struck Goliath in the forehead, sending him crashing to the ground. The army cheered and the Philistines turned and fled, leaving the Israelites triumphant. Well, David saved the day, didn't he, boys and girls? And Goliath would have had a big shield like this one. As normal, we've got a craft to make. But, you know, David didn't need a big shield because he always knew that God was there for him. And he knew that when he was fighting the mighty Goliath, God would be there for him then too, because he put his trust in God. And that's what we do too every day, girls and boys. Next week's story is a lovely story. It's called The Worrysaurus, about a little dinosaur. But before we go, as always, we'll do our prayer together, and if you follow my actions. From the tops of your heads to the tips of our toes, from our wiggly ears to our funny wee nose, from our fronts to our backs and all the way round, God loves us. See you next week, girls and boys.